Welcome to the Explainer. Let's dive straight into this high-level intelligence briefing designed to elevate exactly how you analyze global news. Look, as an analyst, you already know the headlines we see every single day can feel, well, chaotic, completely overwhelming. But beneath all that chaos, there's actually a hidden architecture. So today, we're going completely back to basics to uncover the invisible power that literally drives world politics, military movements, and the global economy. We're going to look right past the politicians and focus squarely on the map.
Politicians make decisions, generals fight wars, economists study markets. But before any of them act, geography has already set the rules. Now, what's really interesting here is how this completely shifts our perspective away from the people in power, right over to the unchangeable rules of the planet itself. Just imagine looking at Earth from space for a second. You don't see borders or countries first, do you? No, you see oceans, mountains, deserts, and rivers. These natural features determined where civilizations emerged, where empires expanded, and where trade routes were forged long before modern governments even existed.
So here is our briefing dossier for today. We'll start with the invisible rule of power, map out the global choke points, zoom right into the artery of the world, analyze the grand chessboard of international players, and finally, wrap things up by teaching you how to truly think like an analyst.
Starting off with Section 1, the invisible rule of power.
The crucial point here is that a serious strategist doesn't start by looking at politics. They start by looking at maps. That's essentially geopolitics, the study of how geography dictates a nation's fate. Think of every country on Earth as playing a massive, extremely high-stakes game. To survive, a nation literally has to look at its map and ask some really fundamental questions. Where are my enemies? Where are my allies? Where are the trade routes? And, can my military actually defend these physical borders? The answers to those specific questions are what truly drive national strategy.
And that brilliantly illustrates our first major paradigm of this briefing, the clash between fast government and slow geography. We get so caught up in election cycles, don't we? But governments change fast. Geography changes incredibly slowly. A president or prime minister might serve for 4 or 5 years, making all these short-term policy decisions. But a mountain range? Well, a mountain range is going to be there for millions of years. It dictates army movements, agricultural zones, and trade routes completely regardless of who happens to be sitting in the capital city. Moving on to part 2, let's look at the global choke points. A lot of people think that, here we are with all this advanced technology, so geography must be obsolete. But despite artificial intelligence, satellite comms, the internet, 80% of global merchandise trade by volume is still carried by sea. The internet absolutely cannot move oil. AI cannot transport a shipment of wheat. The physical world still relies entirely on ships, ports, and sea lanes. Technology hasn't erased the importance of geography at all. Actually, scratch that, it's just made our supply chains way more complex.
Because so much trade happens on the water, not all parts of the ocean are equally important. Think of these 5 narrow passages: the Strait of Hormuz, Bab el-Mandeb, the Suez Canal, the Strait of Malacca, and the Panama Canal, as single bridges on a massive global motorway. We call these choke points. If just one of them gets blocked, global traffic literally stops. And when traffic stops, the ripple effects are immediate. We're talking food prices spiking in Africa, fuel costs surging in Europe, manufacturing halting in Asia. These passages are so incredibly vital that major world powers maintain permanent naval forces just to ensure they stay open.
Let's zoom our satellite view in for Section 3, the artery of the world.
We're looking at a specific collection of bordering nations: Egypt, Sudan, Eritrea, Djibouti, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Jordan, and Israel, that sit right on top of the central artery of global trade. By connecting the Mediterranean Sea in the north through the Suez Canal, all the way down to the Indian Ocean via the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, these countries control an absolute geographic goldmine. If this single route closes, ships traveling between Europe and Asia are forced to sail all the way around the southern tip of Africa. That adds immense time, fuel, and costs to global trade. The domestic politics of any one of these nations can suddenly become a global economic crisis purely because of where they are located.
And hey, it's a massive mistake to view the Horn of Africa as strategically unimportant. Let's look at a prime example here. Ethiopia is completely landlocked, yet it has a booming population of over 120 million people. Because they don't have a coastline, they rely heavily on their tiny neighbor Djibouti, which has transformed it to one of the world's absolute most critical logistics hubs. Because of its prime real estate right near that vital choke point, Djibouti actually hosts multiple foreign military bases to protect these essential shipping lanes. What happens here doesn't just affect Africa, it dictates global shipping and security for all of us.
All right, part 4. Let's examine the grand chessboard.
Think of this entire region as a giant chessboard. The squares on the board, that's the unchangeable geography we've been talking about. The pieces are the individual countries, and the players are the national leaders. The objective of this geopolitical game isn't just winning battles or conquering territory. No, it's securing trade routes, locking down energy supplies, gaining military access, and ensuring long-term national security. A country that controls the right ports can wield far more global influence than a country that just has a massive standing army.
Let's break down the players, starting with the United States. A lot of people ask why the US is involved so far from home, often assuming it's, just about oil. But the reality is far more complex. For the US, it's about protecting the core principle of freedom of navigation and ensuring global economic stability. If these sea lanes are disrupted, it's a massive economic shock to the entire global system. They're also there to protect key regional allies and maintain military access to a highly volatile, yet absolutely essential part of the world.
Meanwhile, you've got China. They rely heavily on these exact same waters, but for slightly different reasons. Their massive economy is highly dependent on importing energy and exporting manufactured goods through the Indian Ocean, up the Red Sea, and straight into Europe. Because their very economic survival depends on this route, they've heavily invested in port infrastructure and, get this, actually built their very first overseas military base right there in Djibouti. They are placing their pieces on the chessboard to actively protect their overseas interests.
Next up, we have Russia. Now, Russia has a historical, geographic disadvantage. A lot of its ports literally freeze in the winter. So Russia views the Middle East and the Red Sea as absolutely vital for securing warm water naval access. Beyond just moving ships around, they're looking to expand their diplomatic influence, secure arms export deals, and cooperate on energy markets. Crucially, maintaining a strong presence here allows Russia to act as a geopolitical counterweight, balancing against Western power in a region that the West desperately needs.
And that brings us to a really fascinating player, Japan. Japan is thousands of miles away, right? But they import the vast majority of their energy. Any disruption in the Red Sea is a direct threat to the supply chains that literally keep the Japanese economy alive. Because of this extreme geographic vulnerability, even Japan maintains a military presence in Djibouti. Yeah, they are there specifically to protect their shipping lanes and conduct counter-piracy operations. It just proves that in geopolitics, local geography has huge global consequences.
Finally, part 5. Let's talk about how to think like an analyst.
The first strategic lesson of this explainer is to never, and I mean never, look at a conflict in isolation. Whenever you hear news breaking about Yemen, Gaza, Sudan, or the Red Sea, do not just react to the chaos. You got to ask yourself these 5 foundational questions to reveal the deeper geopolitical picture. 1. Who actually benefits strategically from this disruption? 2. Exactly which trade route is being affected? 3. What countries rely on that specific route for their survival? 4. What outside global powers have a vested interest there? And 5. Is this just a local dispute or is it a proxy for a much wider regional competition? Asking these questions instantly changes you from a passive news consumer into an active intelligence analyst.
So I'll leave you with this final provocative thought. When the next major conflict breaks out on the map today, and trust me, it will you react to the fast-moving emotional politics of the moment, or are you going to look at the slow-moving, unchangeable geography first? Apply this intelligence framework to the headlines you see today, because in Chapter 2 of this series, we're going to dive incredibly deep into the intense superpower competition within the Red Sea corridor between 2010 and 2026. You now have the foundational tools. Next time, we apply them to the real world.